you never really know fully why you tackle any subject, really. It sort of comes at you, or it comes at me anyway, like a tap on the shoulder. It's not something I plan. I think I've clearly had the subject in mind for many years, and sort of felt somehow I would try and make something to do with it at some point in my life, and here we are. But so there wasn't one particular moment when I decided I was going to make this film. In fact, when we started the process, I really didn't know what film we were going to make and what perspective we were going to be coming at it from.
The Zone of Interest is one of the most interesting films I've seen in a really long time. I saw it at the London Film Festival last year, and it really sticks out in my head as something different. It's currently nominated for the Oscar for Best Picture.
And The Zone of Interest. James Wilson, producer.
And even in that list of movies, it sticks out to me. I think it isn't nominated because of its status as being a cinematic event with a massive marketable cast. It isn't telling a story on an epically large scale. It's not even a character-driven sentimental film that's deeply heartwarming. I think it's rated right up there as a great film because it takes a fundamentally different approach to filmmaking in order to tell a story that's incredibly confronting. The Zone of Interest tells the story of a newly appointed Nazi commandant who relocates his family to an idyllic country home, right next to his place of work, which is Auschwitz concentration camp. I think that alone as a premise sounds repulsive because your gut instinct is, why tell this story? From this perspective, how could you possibly tackle this subject matter without offending or removing the appropriate onus of this dark period in history? That reaction is reasonable because we know movies. We understand that the audience follows a protagonist on the hero's journey. The Zone of Interest is setting out to do something quite unique and truly creatively bold. It's examining an atrocity, but it's also highlighting the reality of how that atrocity came about. These were human-made acts of evil. We would tend to think about the people who committed this as something other than human, perhaps to protect the way in which we see ourselves, allowing us to ignore our own fallible nature. A demonization helps put our mind at ease, and we can therefore say that these people must have been pure evil. That is the only way something like this could have occurred. The horror of the Zone of Interest is it is constantly reminding you of a juxtaposition, that it was human beings who created this large-scale, inhuman act of evil. Jonathan Glazer's approach to the filmmaking is truly fascinating. Glazer used mostly 10 cameras simultaneously to shoot the Zone of Interest. Shooting multi-camera isn't uncommon on the auteur filmmaking level. Martin Scorsese and Ridley Scott have become notorious for it, now having understood the way in which they shoot after decades in the business. Jonathan Glazer's reasoning, though, is innovative. It's not about the efficiency in covering a scene. The cameras are placed square on to the action and will sometimes cut to angles that are perpendicular to the previous one. There are also hidden cameras on set acting like CCTV.
So they wired the whole house with the cameras. Some of them were hidden, some of them were visible, but no camera people were behind it.
We were all in a trailer over the wall, basically.
How it affects the acting, you definitely knew you were all alone with the history, with all the things that were present in that house that I cannot even explain.
The result is this highly forensic viewpoint of these characters. It sort of feels like you're watching animals in the zoo. Every time it cuts to a new angle that was from a different side of the same scene, it feels like the characters were on a stage and the stage is being rotated. This is a fascinating approach because it understands how cinematography is a tool for allowing the audience into the characters. Documentary-style handheld shots and close-ups make us feel for characters, but in this film, there are no close-ups, Steadicam tracking shots, or handheld photography. Instead, the film is saying to the audience, hey, look at this, but don't feel this. This is an objective scene. These things happened. This is how it was, but don't relate too closely to this. Objectivity versus subjectivity is something I particularly find interesting in filmmaking, and I love seeing filmmakers play with this concept. It's often a conundrum in documentary filmmaking, and a couple of years ago I attended a panel at the Sundance London Film Festival entirely on this subject matter with regards to documentaries. Personally, I think the idea of genuine objective truth in filmmaking is inherently nonsense, because as soon as you switch on a camera and point it at someone, you've already started an opinion. That doesn't mean the filmmakers can't work to remove the presence of their gaze from their work. Jonathan Glazer didn't know the story he wanted to tell until he visited the camps and researched heavily into written accounts. So in that sense, this film is the result of that research. This is what Jonathan Glazer believes is objective. But why this viewpoint and why this story? Well, as mentioned previously, he is showing us this family, of which we know a greater historical context for, but ultimately he is showing us ourselves. Recently, the actress Jennifer Lawrence gave an introduction to the zone of interest, and I thought her intro was perfectly worded to surmising this.
The Third Reich was not that long ago. This film begs the question, how will history judge us 50 years from now, 100 years from now, comfortably lounging on the beautiful, safe side of the oftentimes invisible wall that drowns out just enough human suffering that nothing more is expected of us than a, oh dear, how horrible.
As the film progresses, you start to understand that a regime of evil is one that sits in the background. When acts of evil are accepted and normalized, they sit back and aren't questioned too closely. Instead, we see a loving father who is struggling with some office politics. His wife is trying to advise him on navigating his career while settling the kids into a new house. These are relatable and normal things to be contemplating, especially as a suburban family. And that's what's terrifying about this film. The film is therefore encouraging us to not normalize that which is morally wrong, because that's how regimes are created. The film is also very conscious about what to show the audience and what not to show the audience. I quite like how there is this other intercut story shot in infrared cameras. We therefore don't assume a necessary protagonist in this film. This furthers this idea of being one step in the world of the characters and one step removed. The infrared sequences are deeply eerie and haunting and kept me on my toes as to where the film was going. Whilst watching the film, I found myself also thinking about the space depicted within the film. The clue that you might think that is in the title as well as in the poster. So of course, you are constantly confronted with idealistic imagery, with this atrocity just around the corner. The chimney bellowing cremated ashes looms over in the background as children play in the garden. But I also found myself considering the space when characters are inside rooms together, the multi-camera approach, switching up who has the power in a scene, and never finding a comfortable spot to land on. There's a strange irony in which is paired with the blocking. We see this father struggling to decipher the journey he's on. He questions whether he's doing what's best for his career and how he can help his family prosper. As he wonders about the context of his life and what will become of his place of work, we often see shadowy spaces. This film has the best depiction of liminal, vacuous space I've ever seen on film. So if you're interested in seeing this film, understand that it isn't a traditional Hollywood movie. I think Jonathan Glazer is a true artist, and he has approached the medium of film in a literal sense. Okay, how do we use pictures and sound to confront an audience? So this film therefore bears closer resemblance to something you might see in an art gallery curated on war and humanity's subconscious digestion of fascism. I thoroughly recommend seeing it in the cinema because it's the only way to experience the evocative nature of this film. The sound design is astonishing. I happen to have worked with this sound team on a TV show, and I remember they placed microphones everywhere. In the case of this film, the sound crafted this creepy, leering feeling that swallows you up. There were moments in the film where I had goosebumps and I felt very cold. I don't think it's possible to have this experience if you watch the film on a laptop or on a phone. This is cinema taken to its artistic extremes. The film is currently out in cinemas, but it won't always be. So if you're interested in seeing it and can get to a local cinema, I thoroughly encourage you to do so. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like on the video, as it is the best way of letting me know that you're interested in what I have to say about film. It's a small and straightforward thing that just makes me feel really encouraged. Have you seen The Zone of Interest, or are you planning to? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all the comments and I try to respond to as many as I can. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.